I eulogize my father, my little brother, and now my grandfather. And so I know that as soon as I take my text, the Lord will be my help. So I'm going to eulogize. And that merely means to speak good words. So if you would, I'm going to take a non-traditional text for a eulogy, although it is a familiar passage of scripture. I'm going to read my text, do the official acknowledgments, say a prayer, a few good words, summarize my text, and then take my seat. Is that all right? If you would, turn with me to the 6th chapter of Isaiah. For those of you who are following along, we were reading verses 1 through 8 from the King James Version of Isaiah Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1 through 8. You'll find these familiar words recorded. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord sitting upon a throne, high and lifted up, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims. Each one had 6 wings. With twain he covered his face, with twain he covered his feet, and with twain he did fly. And one cried unto another and said, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the post of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. Then said I, Woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken from the tongs off the altar. And he laid it upon my mouth and said, Lo, this hath touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged. Also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then said I, Here am I, send me. Now I know this is not the normal eulogy text, especially for a good man who took pleasure in serving the church. But if you would allow me some latitude with the text, just a little bit preachers of latitude with the text, I want to preach for just a few moments in honor of our patriarch. The king is gone, now what? The king is gone, now what? We give honor to God, who is the head of our lives, to the pastor in his absence, to Pastor Smith, who is so graciously lifting me up, to my brother here, to all the ministers, pastors, officials, leaders, deacons, trustees, all the other people that I might have forgotten. The ushers, thank you for the fans. To my family, to friends, and to you, my brothers and sisters in Christ. I would say it is an honor to stand here before you. I had hoped before my grandfather passed to stand in this pulpit and share a word. It seems that I have preached 4 times for my family, and 3 of them have been eulogies. And so I don't normally ask for the opportunity to preach, but if you want to hear me preach outside of a eulogy, I am available. I will drive all the way from Virginia just to share a word from the Lord. As I said, I've both been dreading and preparing for this day since my father passed in September of 2013. I'll never forget that phone call. Fifi called me early in the morning, and when I saw her number, I assumed she was calling to tell me that Granddaddy had passed. For on that phone call, I sensed that it was death, but it was my father instead. From that time going forward, for the next 6 years, I dreaded and prepared for this day. Last Thursday evening, I received a phone call from Matt. Again, I knew it was death. Even though she had heart and a smile in her voice, you just know. I had assumed, with dread in my heart, that she was calling me to tell me that she had lost her grandbaby. I was relieved to find out that her grandbaby was alive. And then it hit me. It hit me who and what we had just all lost. The king is gone. Now what? As I shared humorously last night in my remarks at the viewing, I really tried to dig up some dirt on Granddaddy. But nobody was giving up the goods. Auntie Sandra probably had some tea, but she just wasn't spilling it. Much like the fallen King Uzziah in our text, while not perfect, Jesse Jones was a good man. A great father and an even better grandfather. In an attempt to properly honor Granddaddy and the son and daughters he leaves to mourn him, I had hoped to gather stories from my aunts and uncle to share during this celebration of his homegoing. But as my cousin Ken shared with me when I explained why and apologized for ducking all his phone calls and texts, the truth is, the more you talk about it, the realer it gets. But Granddaddy lived a good life, a full life, a meaningful life. Our lives, our children's lives, our grandchildren's lives are better because he lived. Granddaddy added value to people's lives. He made each of you, each of us feel special in our own unique way. Even if he did the same thing for you as he did for me, we still felt special because he did it. Each of us knew him in different roles. Even though at times he could be a man of few words, his actions spoke volumes. We saw him love his wife. We saw him smile at her. We saw him husband. We saw him love his children. We saw him build and sacrifice. We saw him correct and discipline. Even when his children made their own choices and lived their own lives, as often we are wont to do, his hand was still evident in the love his children have for one another and the closeness of his grandchildren. Families tend to give the matriarchs all of the credit. But Grandma and Granddaddy were a team, and he played his part. We saw him love on grandkids, great grandkids, and even great grandkids. After Grandma passed, he began to do something that caused alarm for some of the older grandkids. He began to be more affectionate and say, "I love you," a lot more. It felt kind of like he was saying goodbye now that Grandma was no longer by his side, so he was asked about it. And hear me as I paraphrase his response. He said, "Your grandmother always said, I never told the kids I loved them enough. Now that she's gone, I want to make sure that I do." That was Granddaddy. They say you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but this old man honored his late wife and learned to say I love you just a little bit more. Yeah, we all knew that he loved us. We were certain that he loved us. But it sure felt good to hear it in these past 7 years. You don't have to take my word for it. KK, remember when Granddaddy took y'all to buy your first car? That blue, was it an Escort, Mimi? Was it? Mimi, was it? Mimi told the story. It was an Escort? Festive, what is it? Festive, Ford Festive, never heard of it. Good. But the story I was told was that KK didn't know how to drive a stick. And so the car kept stopping and rolling backwards and stalling, but the passengers had a good old time. And nowhere in the story was it told to me that Granddaddy was tripping because she couldn't drive a stick. Who remembers sitting in the garage listening to old shows on the radio? Stuff like The Lone Ranger and old-timey commercials. Who remembers cookouts in the backyard, homemade ice cream? Who remembers sitting in the front watching videos on the screens he would put up? How many of the kids, grandkids, great-grands, nieces, and nephews' first introduction to music was Granddaddy on the harmonica? We all at one time wanted to play with one, and many of us got our chance. How about those sweet potato pies? Who knew you could have different flavors of sweet potato pies? I even heard a rumor from one of my sisters that there was a sweet potato pie with pecans in it. Who remembers fireworks every year at the house and getting bit by those mosquitoes who still run the neighborhood now? The blue van that everyone wanted to ride in on the trips. I heard there was absolutely no way that everybody was buckled up inside that van. I don't know if it was Grandmama's travel sandwiches or Granddaddy's good skills driving, but everyone seems to have made it safely. Granddaddy must have been magical. He definitely had some magic in his hands as he tended to his garden. Jesse Jones had a green thumb and enjoyed sharing the fruit of his labor. He was a good man. Now, I don't know what's going to be engraved on the tombstone. I trust whoever's handling that to handle it. But I would be satisfied if it said these 10 words: here lies Jesse Jones Sr. He was a good man. The king is gone. Now what? Real briefly, our text says that in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord high and lifted up, seated on his throne, and his train filled the temple. Above it stood the seraphims, each one 6 wings. 2 they covered their face, 2 their feet, and 2 they did fly. And one cried unto another, saying, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the posts of the door moved at the voice of him that cried, and the house was filled with smoke. 2 points, and I'm out your way. First, I want to remind each and every one of you that God comes to us in our grief. Biblical history records that King Uzziah was a pretty good king, and he died tragically because of some disobedience to the Lord. But the record attests that he was a good man. Isaiah is recorded to be possibly a cousin or a nephew, or at least a very dear friend of the king, and he finds himself mourning, much like us, at the passing of the king. The king is gone. Now what? God comes to us in our grief. There are times when we find ourselves in situations where all hope seems to be lost. When up is down, down is up, left is right, and right is left, and we can't seem to find our way. But if we just take a moment to look up, we will see that God is still on the throne. The king is gone. Now what? We have to, in times of grief, in times of hopelessness, in times where our heart is heavy, in times where there is loss, we have to remember that God is still on the throne. It says he's seated upon the throne high and lifted up. If the king is still seated, it means he's still in control. God is in control. The only way that God could sit on the throne at a time of grief when the nation was in transition is if God recognized who he was and who God and what God was capable of doing. If in times of upheaval, if in times of storm, if in times of grief, you feel that you are powerless, remember that we serve an all-powerful God, and he is still seated on the throne. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also the Lord. For me to see also the Lord, it means that there was something else that I saw. I saw that the king was dead. I saw that the nation was in mourning. I saw that the nation was in turmoil. I saw the possibility of loss of life and liberty, but I saw also the Lord. Don't forget that there's an also in your grief. Don't forget that there's an also in your grief. Don't forget that there's an also in your grief. It's going to be strange going around the corner and grandmama and granddaddy not being in the house, but also see the Lord. July seems to be a horrible month for our family, but also see the Lord. It seems that another leaf has fallen off the family tree. And as we watch it wave its way to the ground, see that, but see also the Lord. For the seraphim cried, they cried, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. In other words, there should be nowhere that you can turn that you do not see and feel the presence of the Lord, because God comes to us in our grief. But I don't want to be up here a long time because my feet hurt. And I'm tired because I was up working on this eulogy that I didn't want to write because I've been dreading this day since 2013. But I looked at the text in verses 5 through 8, and I saw something that was very interesting, and I'll leave this with you as I prepare to take my seat. The first thing that we notice in the first verses is that God does make an appearance in our lives in times of grief. Verse 5 says, then said I, woe is me, for I am undone, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Why? For mine eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then flew one of the seraphims unto me, having a live coal in his hand, which he had taken from the tongs off the altar, and he laid it upon my mouth and said, lo, this has touched thy lips, and thine iniquity is taken away, thy sin is purged. Verse 8, and also I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, here am I, send me. First, we realize that God comes to us in our grief. Second, we see that we are commissioned in our gratitude. We are commissioned in our gratitude. Isaiah found himself prepared in his call to speak to a people that were unworthy of God's love, but he recognized that he too was unworthy. he felt undone. He felt dirty. He felt unclean. He was terrified, mortified even, because he had been in the presence of the Almighty God. First, he was thrilled to see the Lord because he saw the Lord high and lifted up. Because again, God comes to us in our grief. But then he recognized who he was in the presence of the Lord, saw himself as the person he really was, saw the people as the people that they really were, and then he felt undone. Have you ever felt undone? Have you ever felt in over your head? Have you ever felt like you did something so bad that God could not and would not forgive you? But God does put us in position to be in right relationship with him so that we can do the things that God would have us to do. And so Isaiah was cleaned up. He was purged. His iniquity was taken away. And then he heard from heaven the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" Many of us have had the benefit, even the blessing, of growing up in a family with a firm foundation in God. Many of us, dare I say most of us, have grown up with the benefit and the blessing of being a part of a family that knows what it means to have a relationship with God. There are benefits and blessings to growing up in a family in close connection with the blessings of God. But along with those blessings, there comes a responsibility. Today, we lay to rest the King. And we might be a little bit sad. Some of us might even feel angry that we may not have spent as much time with him as we should have. My approach was different. I purposely avoided Granddaddy as much as I possibly could because I could not handle the grief of losing my father and knowing my father died in that house and my brother was murdered around the corner from that house. So I avoided him as much as I possibly could. And then he had Ophelia call me. Even as he was losing his memory, he looked at me and said, "You the preacher." So he knew who I was, and that was good enough for me. But again, there is a responsibility that falls in our lap as a family that grew up under the benefit and blessing of being in a family that knew God. God is calling on us now as we have seen him high and lifted up, and God is saying to the Jones clan, "Whom shall I send and who will go for us?" Many of us now have the opportunity, nay, the responsibility to say, "Here I am, send me." Granddaddy is gone. The King is dead. Now what? Now we have an opportunity to live out purposely the benefits and the blessings that came our way because we had a father and a grandfather and a great-grandfather who knew the Lord. Who am I going to send? Who will go for us? And we have to take the opportunity to say, "Here I am, send me." Is there one in the house who's ready to go on a little bit further in the name of the Lord, in Granddaddy's name, in Grandmama's name? "Here I am, send me." Your heart might be heavy. The load might feel unbearable at times, but here I am, send me. It might might be difficult in 2019 to purposely and publicly profess love for Christ in this climate, in this environment, but here I am, send me. This time next year, we'll be mourning Grandma and Granddaddy and even Uncle Jerry, but here I am, send me. 2 years from now, we might be passing up another family reunion with another leaf from the family tree having fallen to the ground, but here I am, send me. We ought to be thankful with our lives, thankful with our money, thankful with our time, thankful with our talent, thankful with our resources for all the blessings that have come upon us because we grew up in a family that benefited from knowing the Lord. And so as I prepare to take my seat, no longer grieving, no longer sad, but knowing that after the phone calls stop and the text messages stop coming in and the condolences stop flowing on Facebook, I am still here by the grace of God. Here I am, send me.